Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is TVP World. You're watching World News Tonight. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee. German elections are just around the corner, with the whole country divided over multiple issues, with migration being just one of them. More on that in just a moment, but first, the latest headlines. Zelensky says Kyiv is not ready to sign mineral deal with Washington. Polish policymakers visit the United States to discuss peace in Ukraine. Thousands march in the Hungarian capital calling for judicial independence. A knife attack in Berlin on Friday night has sent shockwaves through the country, just days before Germans head to the polls. With security concerns and key election issues at the forefront, voters are preparing to decide the country's future. We go live to our correspondent, Sasha Fabak, for the latest. Hey, Sasha, what are you hearing from the people on the ground? Could this impact the elections tomorrow?
Good evening, Ben. So, yeah, here's what we know. I mean, another shocking point here. Last night on Friday, there was a knife attack really close by here to the Brandenburg gate here, which was by the Holocaust Memorial. Now, a Spanish tourist, was actually stabbed in the neck. Now, he's in stable condition. Now, the person apprehended seems to what the police have said. This is someone who was a refugee from Syria. He's 19 years old, now in police custody, and he is actually just in the last few hours, there's information from the prosecutors here that there was an anti-Semitic motive behind the attack. Now, this has sent shockwaves through the country, as already there have been several attacks in the last months and last weeks, really. If you look back at Solingen last year, there was a knife attack there. We're looking at that car ramming as well in Munich just months ago. So this will hit hard to hear this again for many Germans. So we asked not just tourists who are visiting, but also local Germans what their reactions were to this attack. Let's listen now.
It's shocking. It was something that I didn't expect. It isn't that it scares me. It's hard to find words for this. It's not easy to have an answer to this. It's simply unbelievable. Everything can happen.
It makes me feel really sad, as an outsider, somebody who's in India and now working here. Of course, it does make you a little insecure, unsafe. Yeah, it's very sad.
Now, although there was shock and sadness here, we are also hitting the elections. The eve before the main one, the big night, will be tomorrow, as Germans, some have already voted, but millions will be eligible. And we're going to see, we've been pacing around the country, taking the pulse of what people say, different issues at stake. Some have said migration, some have said the cost of living, some have said climate. It really depends. But many, ultimately, the idea here is that many are tired of how things have been going. They want a change. Now, just a quick snapshot of some of the standing of certain polls. Who's due to be doing very well tomorrow will be Friedrich Merz, head of the Conservative Party CDU. Now, his party likely coming up on top, around 30% in the latest polls. Now, second is the AfD, that far-right party that very much has no chance at government yet, but they have been gaining in polls around 20% around the country. And then if we look down further, about 16%, the SPD, that's Chancellor Scholz's party, who will likely no longer be chancellor tomorrow, and then also the Greens lower and the smaller parties. Remember, 5% threshold for some of those. Now, what those parties stand for, what they're all about, there's a next piece now. We'll have more from Michael von Blomstein. Let's take a look.
Olaf Scholz, Friedrich Merz, Alice Weidel. These three feature most heavily during this election campaign. For current Chancellor Scholz, things look grim. The former Labour minister and mayor of Hamburg has been struggling with law approval numbers, mainly caused by a sluggish economy. In 2024, the German economy shrank for the second year in a row.
People feel the recession that we are in. And then there is also the topic of security, inner security in our country, migration, which has been dominating this election the past weeks.
Scholz was known to be cautious towards Russia and Ukraine. He staunchly opposes sending long-range missiles to Kyiv and even had a phone call with Russian leader Vladimir Putin last November. Scholz's approval has been underwater since 2022. In an effort to curb this, he has taken a tougher stance on migration after a series of violent crimes carried out by migrants.
If they have committed such crimes and do not have German citizenship, then they must certainly expect that we will return them to another country.
Despite his glaring unpopularity, he decided to run again from the top of his ticket for his Social Democrat SPD party.
I am quite sure that in the end many people will decide to vote for the SPD, for the constituencies the first vote and for the SPD as a whole the second vote, so that we are strong enough and also so that the government under my leadership can be continued.
Polls, however, have suggested his job will be taken by Friedrich Merz. Under his leadership, the Christian Democrat CDU holds a comfortable lead in the polls. The veteran politician has been a prominent party member since his rise to parliamentary leader in the early 2000s. In the end, he lost a power struggle to Angela Merkel, who went on to become German Chancellor for 16 years. As opposition leader, Merz has been more hawkish towards Ukraine than Olaf Scholz. He has supported the delivery of heavy weapons from the start and has repeatedly said that Ukraine must win the war. He has also been a vocal opponent of the far-right AfD, repeating over and over again that he refuses any form of cooperation with them. Even on migration, where Merz has called for a much tougher stance, he has refused to reach out to the party of Alice Weidel.
Imagine for a moment that all those who live in Germany today and have a migration background were to stop for 24 hours. Nothing would work in Germany anymore. And that, dear friends, is precisely what sets us apart in dealing with this issue.
Despite being definitely excluded from any form of coalition, the result of the AfD will be consequential. The larger Weidel's party becomes, the harder it will be for the winner to form a stable government. Working herself up from the AfD's lower ranks, Weidel has continued the party's path from a general Eurosceptic party to a far-right, pro-Kremlin populist force.
At some point it looked like she was going to have a moderate influence on the party, and she did represent the more moderate voices within the party. But now we have to, when we look at the party program, it is obvious that she did not prevent the party from radicalizing.
Under Weidel, the AfD has maintained its openly pro-Russian stance, advocating to stop all support for Ukraine. The party has risen to second place in the polls.
Germany should no longer be involved in Ukraine at all. Most notably, not with arms deliveries, not with the deployment of soldiers, and no longer with financial aid.
The polling doesn't suggest that a neck-and-neck race is in the cards. What it does suggest is the formation of some very complicated coalition.
U.S. President Donald Trump has announced a new round of negotiations between U.S. officials and Russian officials to take place in Riyadh on Tuesday. As the Ukrainian government continues to work on a rare earth mineral deal the Trump administration wants from Ukraine in exchange for continued support. Our Ukraine correspondent, Oz Chatterjee, joins us from Kyiv with more. Good evening, Oz. What more can you tell us about these negotiations?
So again, these negotiations announced by US President Donald Trump between US officials and Russian officials to take place in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, do not include Ukraine again. Now, again, we don't have further details about what is expected to be discussed, but we do know from the Ukrainian government that they will not recognize any kinds of agreements made between Russia and the United States that do not include Ukraine as participation. Now, we also understand that Zelensky thinks that the rare earth deal isn't ready to be signed yet. We do know from the Ukrainian parliamentary speaker, Ruslan Stefanchuk, speaking to Japanese media on Saturday, saying that the Ukrainian parliament is expected to begin work on a mineral deal on Monday, the 24th. So a lot to go on there, a lot more work to be done. But the Ukrainians are certainly not interested in signing a deal that does not benefit them in the long run. However, we understand from Reuters this morning that the United States had pressured Kyiv and threatened to cut it off from Starlink, the satellite internet system owned by Elon Musk's SpaceX company, if they did not comply with the demands of this mineral deal. So again, Ukraine is walking quite a difficult tightrope here, trying to balance its needs with the desires of US President Donald Trump in some sort of quid pro quo for continued support from Washington. So difficult position for Ukraine to be in, and a lot more work needs to be done if a rare earth mineral deal is to be struck.
All right, so we'll have to see how Ukraine navigates this. In the meantime, thank you so much for your update. Appreciate it. Top Polish officials are on a diplomatic push as peace negotiations continue between the U.S., Russia, and Ukraine. Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski has presented Warsaw's perspective on a potential resolution to his American counterpart Marco Rubio in Washington. He has also met with U.S. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. Meanwhile, Polish President Andrzej Duda has spoken directly with U.S. President Donald Trump. Kazimierz Wysiak reports.
Here in Washington, it may be easy to be calm and collected when talking about the war in Ukraine. But the closer you get to scenes like this and this, the more you can feel the weight of the peace negotiations. And Poland is right there on the edge of the war zone. Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski conveyed the perspective of a NATO country bordering both Ukraine and Russia during his meetings with both US Secretary of State Marco Rubio and the National Security Advisor Mike Waltz.
The meeting was substantive and cordial. We have also planned further cooperation forums. As for the topics, you can guess. Of course, current issues of war and peace in Europe.
Sikorski even brought a tangible piece of evidence of who invaded who, in case it wasn't clear enough for the US administration.
I'm presenting here the Iranian drone, used by Russians and shot down by Ukrainians over their land, which we first took to Poland and now here, thanks to Prime Minister Donald Tusk.
Since returning to the Oval Office in January, US President Donald Trump has been quick to criticize both Ukraine and its European allies on their approach to the war.
I've had very good talks with Putin, and I've had not such good talks with Ukraine. They don't have any cards, but they play it tough.
But seeing as Poland spends the most on defense percentage-wise in all of NATO, at 4.7% of GDP, the United States still sees it as a crucial ally in Europe.
I met with Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski today to talk about how the US-Poland relationship can better deliver benefits to both the American and Polish people. We also discussed the Russia-Ukraine war and the need for all NATO allies to increase their defense investment without delay.
After Trump called Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky a dictator and falsely accused Kyiv of starting the war, all but one European leader quickly rallied behind Zelensky. Polish President Andrzej Duda chose to trust his longtime friend instead, with whom he met on Saturday in Washington.
I suggested to President Zelensky to remain committed to the cause of calm and constructive cooperation with Donald Trump. I trust that goodwill and honesty form the foundation of the US negotiation strategy.
This approach from the Polish president, who hails from the conservative opposition party Law and Justice, has prompted Prime Minister Donald Tusk to call for unity in securing Poland's best interests.
I ask everyone to appreciate and respect the efforts of everyone who makes them for the security of Poland. The government and the president must act together in this matter, regardless of all differences.
According to geopolitics analyst Andreas Umland, European conservatives should think twice before praising Donald Trump and his administration's critical comments against Ukraine and Europe.
But here, the national security and the international security of Western country is under threat from this strange culture war that the US is now bringing into world affairs.
As President Trump seemingly wants peace under any circumstances, Warsaw hopes to convince Washington that fair peace conditions are not only in Ukraine's and Europe's, but also America's best interests. For Poland, it's just a matter of perspective. Kazimierz Wysiak, TVP World.
Hungarian judges and court employees are protesting a new measure introduced by Viktor Orbán's government. Concerns over judicial independence have long been an issue, but a policy linking judge salaries to government-backed reforms has sparked fresh outrage.
Thousands of Hungarian judges, court staff and supporters marched to the Ministry of Justice. They demand judicial independence, freedom of expression and better pay.
Our first cause is to protect judicial independence. We are not saying it has been eliminated. However, there are signs that it is under threat.
The rule of law in Hungary has been put in question ever since Prime Minister Viktor Orbán came into power in 2011. He has regularly clashed over the issue with other European leaders. Brussels has frozen billions of euros over Budapest's backsliding on the issue. In December 2023, over 10 billion euros were unfrozen, around the time Orbán dropped his opposition to Ukraine initializing accession talks. The EU claimed Hungary has made progress in addressing rule of law issues. New measures by the government put judicial independence under pressure. According to the proposal, salaries for judges and other court workers will be tied to broader reforms coming from the government being implemented. Critics argue the new rules are aimed to squeeze judges financially into ruling the way the government wants them to. The government has dismissed the protests.
The judges go out on the street to demonstrate to protect the independence of judges. Europe has not seen many judges protest.
While the various judges' bodies have agreed to the government proposals, protesters accuse the government of putting them under pressure to sign.
Serbia's student protest movement is gaining momentum, with demonstrators refusing to back down. From mass marches to worker and teacher uprisings, unrest is spreading across the country. What's driving this movement and where could it be headed next?
The latest show of determination comes from Zrenjanin, where the students from the Mihailo Pupin Technical Faculty have embarked on a 100-kilometer march to Vrsac. This follows similar protest hikes, including the major demonstration where Belgrade students marched to Novi Sad and gathered in Kragujevac.
We put our personal ideologies aside because what we're doing here is bigger than all of that. We're trying to build a country, we're trying to make the institutions function.
Our message is that we are not giving up and we know what we want.
Protests in Serbia began after the roof of a newly renovated railway station in Novi Sad collapsed last November, killing 15. Lack of oversight and wider government corruption are blamed for the disaster.
These protests are possibly the biggest challenge to Alexander Vucic's government since he became president in 2017. Initially, the protesters were not listened to, but with time and perseverance, the government started to make some concessions.
Both the Serbian Prime Minister Miloš Vučević and the mayor of Novi Sad Milan Đurić have resigned in an attempt to appease the protesters. President Vučić has also announced that he will be replacing 50% of his ministers, but he himself is not so eager to resign. Additionally, the Higher Public Prosecutor's Office in Belgrade has announced the arrest of several government officials.
The arrested persons are charged with abuse of official position in inciting and assisting, as well as money laundering.
The protests sparked by the tragedy have quickly evolved into one of Serbia's largest anti-corruption movements in recent years. At the same time, the Serbian president blames, quote, foreign powers for the protests.
Serbia is under attack, not only from the outside, but also from within, by those who want to manipulate our youth, abuse them for the most corrupt political purposes, and win something that the people did not give them in the elections.
Freedom House has assessed Serbia as a democracy in transit, and its freedom score based on people's access to political rights and civil liberties is only 57 out of 100, while another ex-Yugoslavian country, Croatia, scored 83 out of 100 and Slovenia 96 out of 100.
Now, 3 years since Russia's full-scale invasion, Ukraine remains at the center of a conflict reshaping global security. As the war grinds on, questions about peace talks, U.S. diplomatic efforts, and Ukraine's long-term securities persist. Meanwhile, Poland continues to be a crucial ally, offering military, economic, and diplomatic support. Joining us today on TVP World to discuss Ukraine's path forward is Vasyl Bodnar, ambassador of Ukraine to Poland. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Good evening. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
So, Your Excellency, as we mark the third anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, how would you personally characterize the current prospect for peace?
It is still too far to speak about the peace. We are now at the stage when we are keeping the line on the fronts, I mean physical fronts, and we are also discussing with our partners how to start these talks, on what conditions, and how we will be available on what conditions to talk with Russians, which are invaders to Ukraine. I would like to remind that it was Russia who started the war. It is Russia who is killing Ukrainian civilians, and it is Russia who is making a lot of criminal acts against Ukraine. So we need to be united together with the Western world to compose the common stance on punishing the aggressor and creating the conditions for just and fair peace. And that's our task. And we are also discussing these ideas with our American colleagues.
Right. I think just and fair peace is very, very crucial here. Of course, a lot of people are pushing for a simple peace, but without a just one, without holding the aggressor accountable, who's to say that they won't just regroup and do it all again? So from your more diplomatic perspective, what conditions would Ukraine consider essential for the meaningful peace negotiation?
Let's look at the history, what we have in our history. When the Nazi Germany was punished and the perpetrators of criminal acts have been also brought to responsibility, the war didn't appear on the European scene for more than 60, 70 years. So Germany was a calm and economically developed country and was a model of economic integration in Europe. Nevertheless, we have Russia, who have been conducting crimes from a collapse of the Soviet Union in different countries and have never been punished for their illegal activities. So first of all, justice means punishment of the aggressor. It means not to appease him, not to appease Putin, not to appease Russian aggressive policy, but to stop them, pull back, and restore territorial integrity of Ukraine. It's our primary goal, but also brought the perpetrator to responsibility. This or that way, tomorrow or the day after tomorrow or in a year, but it shouldn't be forgotten. Otherwise, our sacrifice will be for vain. And the third story is about the reconstruction of Ukraine and who will pay for that. So Russia did a lot of destructions in Ukraine and continue to bombard Ukrainian civilian objects, industrial capacities, and also electricity supplies lines. So it means it should be reconstructed, and Russia should pay for that. So the easiest way is to take the Russian frozen assets and to use them for reconstruction of Ukrainian territory. And we should have the common ground together with our Western alliance on this, how to push Russia to pay for their retributions, actually.
Right, and well, one of the more controversial events that took place recently is the talk between the United States and Russia, which occurred without Ukraine's direct participation. Do you think this is going to affect Ukraine's position in this potential negotiation in achieving what you just mentioned?
The United States are a key and crucial partner for recent decades. So we are very closely tied on the democratic changes, in the transformation of our economy, in close support from the United States in this ongoing war of aggression of Russia against Ukraine. So and we also need to talk with the American partners, and we are doing that to achieve a compromise solution on the deal which we actually proposed. It was the peace plan or the victory plan of President Zelensky, who proposed the idea of working together on investments in our natural resources, including these rare metal materials, whatever they're called. But nevertheless, it is also the matter of agreement between two allied countries, between Ukraine and the United States, but also we should include Europe here. Poland is a crucial player in the European Union, and it is a close ally of the United States. And we are very grateful to Poland for all the efforts to help Ukraine, to support in our conversations with the new administration of Trump, and also in the efforts which have been paid in recent hours, I would say, because Minister Sikorski is already in the States, he already conducted negotiations with Secretary of State Marco Rubio. President Duda today is also in the States. He will hold talks with Americans as well. And we believe that the Polish side will be very active and promotive of our ideas, how to settle the disputes and how to continue our talks and move forward.
All right, now there's another recent calls which is quite controversial in the various quarter, including even from President Donald Trump, about Ukraine holding elections. Can you help address this in the practical security challenges for organizing election during an ongoing conflict?
look, we would be the first who would like to organize the elections according to the democratic procedures, because we are the democratic country. We need to have elections. But how to organize them if the 20% of the country is occupied? We have 1.8 thousand kilometers of the front line. We still have flying Iranian drones and Russian missiles everywhere. So millions of soldiers are on the front line. They couldn't vote. They just take the rifles in their hands. So, and 7 million Ukrainians are abroad. How you could organize it physically? It's still a big issue. So, if you would have a good advice and assistance, let's talk about that. But we have organized a couple of surveys in Ukraine, and majority of Ukrainians, including the opposition, said that today elections are controversial for us. And it's impossible not only from the physical point of view or judicial, which is actually the law and constitutions forbid it, but it is also dangerous from the point of view of national unity. Elections every time the political fight.
Right.
And to divide Ukrainian society for some political leaders other than the existing one, it means not not to create the democratic procedures, but to create the unstable situation which is on the hand of Russians. We wouldn't like to create more favorable conditions for the Russian side. We would like to disperse Ukrainian society, to feel us weaker, and to use the situation for the continuing attacks on us.
Right, that's a very good point. Election usually comes polarization, and that's perhaps lasting.
But it's natural in democracy.
Exactly.
In the peacetime.
Mm-hmm. And we don't really need that at the moment right now, this type of polarization. Now, you just mentioned earlier also about the discussion including rare earth minerals. Can you tell us a little bit about what's the process right now? What do we know?
So it's going well. We have a good dialogue on the level of our foreign minister, Andrzej Duda, and Marco Rubio from American side. We have also some discussions on the level of head of our presidential office with his vis-a-vis. And also, I believe that in the nearest maybe days we would find a ground for the settlement of the agreement and to set the conditions for the agreement, which should be beneficial for both sides. It's not possible to impose some kind of conditions which are not favorable for Ukrainian economy, which is also suffering already from the war. But we need to create conditions for the future development and reconstruction of Ukraine, also using this opportunity. So we need to keep the lines open for the conversations. We need to dispute on the conditions of this agreement, and I believe we would find a ground together.
All right, so a lot of things to balance and juggle there, and hopefully that goes well. Going to what you mentioned, of course, Ukraine's ally not just being United States, but also Poland and broader European support for Ukraine's position is very important as well. How do you see Polish European support for Ukraine position in any future peace negotiations? How do you think that the contribution of Europe in terms of these talks will help Ukraine going forward?
The war is going on in Europe. Mm-hmm. And Ukraine is a European state, so we have a very huge support from Poland, from other EU countries, and we believe that the EU should be at the table of negotiations fully and engaged in the process from the very beginning. But I'm still cautious about these speculations, which is not the truth. We have no even a ground for the peace talks because we didn't know the conditions. We didn't know what the sides could propose for the negotiation table. We need to compose the strong stance and to impose peace through strength, not through weakness. And if someone would like to weaken the Ukrainian side, it's a mistake. And also for the European side, which is also supporting Ukraine in many areas, and hopefully will continue to do that in the more broader way. Plus, Europe is endangered by Russian aggression. Many European countries have borders with Russia, and they feel threatened because from their history, they have this experience that Russia, every time when there are some turbulences in the world, tried to use these geopolitical conditions to attack them, occupy, or interfere into their affairs. So I wouldn't say that today Estonia, Latvia, or even Norwegian Norwegian country is free from the danger from the Russian aggression. And if we will be weak before even the negotiation table, Russia will feel it and will try to use disagreements inside the EU or between the allies in transatlantic against all of us. They will try to play us separately, and that's the biggest problem. Right. Plus, what is necessary to mention about the restoration or reconstruction of European defense industries? It is very necessary to strengthen the capabilities of Europe to be more resilient, to be more strong in the defense terms, and also be more independent. Because if European defense industry will not be developed well, if anything happens, only missiles or ammunition will be enough for 1 week of war. And Russians are prepared well for that.
Right.
Already the experience fighting Ukraine, yes, they are not very successful in our soil, but they could repeat it in somewhere else where the weaker country exists. So that's the bell for the whole European security. The OEC will not protect any country. And discussions with the bear which would like to eat you will have nothing to do with reality.
All right. Thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it. Thanks for being with us on TVP World.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for tuning into this edition of World News Tonight. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.